Hello, and welcome back to Ask a Newsworker. Today we're going to talk about the concept of newsworthiness. What makes something newsworthy? A lot of people will say things like, why is that in the news? I can't believe that's news. Why did they make news out of that? I can't believe I'm reading that. Why is something newsworthy and other things not? What makes something worth getting into the news? Well, the short answer is that something is newsworthy because people in the news business decided that it's newsworthy. And that has nothing to do with how you feel about it, how other people feel about it. It's about the people who work in the news business and what they would like to be in the news based on what they're surveying of the great grand landscape that is human life on planet Earth. That is really it. What is newsworthy? It's what news people decide is newsworthy. And if someone else has a problem with that, there's really not much that can be done. Maybe other than starting your own news outlet and trying to promote and give attention to the things that you think are newsworthy as opposed to what is going on in other news outlets. But that is really it. Something is news because people in the news business decide to make it news. They decide to anoint a specific thing that is happening in the world as, quote, news. They turn it into a news item. They turn it into a video, an article, an audio report. There's all sorts of different mediums at this point, but something becomes news because news people, like myself, decide that it is news, and that is it. So if someone, again, is unhappy that something is in the news and they feel that it doesn't belong there, there's really not much that can be done about that besides maybe, again, starting your own thing or writing the organization and saying, hey, I didn't like how you made news out of this. I don't think it should be news. There's nothing newsy about it. But again, it's not up to you. Unfortunately, it's the powers that be. It's the people in the news business. This is why the news is powerful. This is why the media is powerful. They have the ability to make something news, to make something a widespread piece of news that people then read and hear about and discuss in a way that other institutions don't. If something is newsworthy to you and you talk to your friends and family about it, it will just circulate amongst them. It won't be on television necessarily. It won't be on Twitter necessarily. It won't be in major published newspapers around the world. It'll just circulate amongst you and your pals and the people you care about. But that's very different from a news organization saying this particular thing, this particular item, this particular phenomenon, this particular event or person, this is news, and now it shall circulate as such. It gives it a significance and an importance that ordinary people simply can't apply to things in their own lives. You can't, unfortunately, make certain things more important in a global societal sense than they are unless you have a news outlet that can help you do it. This is why activists and politicians and pretty much anyone with any sort of agenda of any sort is always trying to get into the news, trying to get media attention, because the news basically validates, it's a way of validating what your thing is, what your concern, what your gripe, what your issue is, in a way that wouldn't be possible without their coverage. So that's why there's so many groups, individuals, institutions every day trying to get into the news, trying to make their issue, their cause, their goal seem newsworthy, because they know that once it gets into the news, people will start to hear about it. They'll start to talk about it. It takes on a significance that it didn't have before. And a lot of people will say, oh, I saw that thing in the news, da 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 da. Being in the news is significant unto itself. Not being in the news is not. So what is newsworthy? Once again, what news people decide is newsworthy. And what are their criteria? It's going to really depend. It's going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on the organization. It's going to maybe even depend on the time of day, the time of year. I've known people in the news business who write and talk about things simply because they're interested in them. They think they're interesting. There's certain issues or topics or people or things in the world, bands, artists, whomever, that they think are interesting, and so they write and talk about them exclusively because they're interested in them. And sometimes those bits of journalism are the best kind because the people are actually passionate and interested in what they're talking about, what they're reporting on. But remember, the only reason it's in the news is because the news worker, the news person, decided to make it so. That is the crucial thing to understand, is that something is in the news because news people who work in the news business have decided individually and collectively that something is news. So what makes something newsworthy? The only criteria is convincing a news person that it's news. That yes, we can make this into a news item. Yes, we'll turn this press release into a news item. We'll take what this person said in this particular interview and make it a news item. There's a phenomenon that has been happening more and more with the rise of podcasts, and it happened with radio shows and television shows and newspapers before that, where someone will say something on a podcast that becomes a news item. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of people uploading audio and video to the internet all the time, myself included, is what I'm doing here. But a lot of it doesn't get remarked upon. A lot of it doesn't turn into news. How come some things that some people say on some podcasts become news and other things don't? Simply because somebody decided to make it news. Someone heard something on a podcast and said, let's make that a news item. Let's say this person said this on this podcast, maybe because it was controversial, maybe because it was provocative. But there's a lot of controversial and provocative things happening on podcasts all the time, and there's not individual news items being made about every single sentence. Some of them get turned into news and some of them don't. Again, a news item is a creation of the news business, and the news business is made up of people, of human beings who are collectively and individually deciding what will be news. So that's really it. It's not more complicated than that. So next time you see something in the news and go, why is that news? Why is that in the news? Like, I don't understand why that's in the news. The answer to your question, to your frustration is, it's in the news because news people wanted it there. That is it. And that might bother you. It's bothered me sometimes as a news worker. I've sometimes found myself working on news items, working on stories that I thought were silly or superfluous or nonsensical, unhelpful, nonsense. Yeah, I already said nonsensical. Nonsensical. I've worked on stuff where I wasn't sure what the real point of it was, but it was there because other people decided to make it a news item. And the more a news item gets attention, the more it grows in significance, the more coverage it will get. So coverage begets coverage, basically. The more a story gets noticed, the more a story gets written about, talked about, the more it gets sort of traded up, the more it increases in significance, almost like the stock market in some ways. A stock will rally on the stock market because it's going up in price, and people go, hey, that thing's going up in price, I want to get on that. And all sorts of investors pile in because they want to get in on the rising price. It's a similar phenomenon that's happening in the news. When a news story starts to rise in significance and importance, it's because more and more people are giving it attention, retweeting it, writing about it, writing reaction pieces, which create their own reactions. That's how a media frenzy takes place, and we can do a separate video on that at some point, what a media frenzy is, although you can probably already figure it out. It's just a pile-on. It's news begetting more news, because one person originally decided that it was newsworthy. It all has to begin with a news outlet saying, this is news. An editor, a publisher, a journalist coming together and saying, this is news. We're going to make this a news item. We're going to put it out into the world as news, and it will thus therefore circulate as such. But it's a decision that has to be made. And that's it. That's really all it is. So to recap, what makes something newsworthy? The opinions and perspectives of people in the news business. They are the arbiters. They are the deciders. Sometimes their hand is forced. If they see something going on social media that's really blowing up, they go, oh, we should probably do something on this. There's all sorts of pressures being put upon news people to make some things news items and to ignore other things. But fundamentally, something is newsworthy when a news person or a news organization decides that it is such. That is it. And that might not be fulfilling for people. That might be annoying. That might seem very arbitrary. It is. It's absolutely arbitrary. It's arbitrary in the sense that it's up to the whims and thoughts and decisions of people in the news business. And that's it. Does this bother you? Does this annoy you? Are you upset to hear this? Is it not surprising? Is it predictable? Is it obvious? Let me know in the comments. Write me an email, and we can further the discussion here on Ask a Newsworker. Thanks again for watching.